This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. With me this week are two living record players playing uneven jazz records. I'm joined by Paul Jasley.
Hello.
And Kate Scotchless.
Hello.
Thank you both for joining me this week. I am very excited to talk about comic books with you. It was just the great mega Halloween day yesterday, and now we are in the month of November, which means it's okay for you to put up Christmas lights if you really feel inclined to do so. I'm legally mandated to ask a question every week, and that is, how have you been and how have comic books been? So I'm going to pitch things over to Kate.
I've been good. I've been using the curbside pickup services from my local library, which means that they're like quarantining the books before you come get them, and then it's like contactless pickup. But I don't want to like just have the work for just like one thing at a time, so I try and order a few at a time, but I don't know what to read, and so I've just been going with authors that people have recommended to me, and so I'll get a haul of like 4 books by the same person. And because of Melcat, our statewide our interlibrary loan system being down, or maybe it's back up but it's not available by my library yet, I don't know, but mostly what they have is OGNs at my library. They don't have a lot of volumes of like Image comics and stuff like that, or at least
Gotcha.
they seem to get lost. There's a fair number of comics that I requested, then they're just like, yeah, we can't find this. So I'm like, okay. So my most recent hauls have been Tillie Walden books and Raina Telgemeier books.
Hell yes.
And both of them have been 10 out of 10, nothing but home runs. So I finished reading Spinning by Tillie Walden, which is her memoir about being a young figure skater.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fantastic. I think it's especially poignant for anyone who did anything super competitive or like a sport intensely as a child.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely brought back certain like feelings. It was interesting, like things that I thought were kind of unique to some of my experiences. And I did figure skating, but not the way she was doing it.
Right.
And so for me, I was relating it to a different sport, but it was like, oh wow, like the whole thing of like, she for so long didn't quit because she like just didn't know she could, and she felt like people were counting on her and stuff like that. And then when she did quit, it's like no big deal. People are just like, oh, okay. And her mom's like, oh, cool, then we won't have that expense anymore. And she's like, I was mad at myself because it was that easy. I put myself through years of like doing this stuff that I didn't want to do, and it was that easy. And I'm like, oh, yeah, relatable. And then Sisters is the second book in, I don't know, Goodreads calls it a series. I think you can read them in whatever order you want, but the Smile series of her memoir books about growing up. And this one is about her and her sister's relationship, and it's told through the lens of a road trip they took, where it was a 3-week road trip in like a hot van with her mom, sister, and brother during a very stressful period, and they're already stressful despite like not counting the heat and van conditions and stuff in their family life because of some stuff going on with her parents. And
this is the Raina Telgemeier book, right?
Yeah,
okay.
And so it's really well told in like the series of like this overarching road trip, but then there's like a whole bunch of series of like flashbacks that are really well timed, explaining, like giving more background and detail into her relationship with her sister. And they really clash a lot because they're very different people and both seem very strong-willed. And I thought it was delightful. There's a reason this author wins Eisner after Eisner. Like she's fantastic. So
there's a reason why she's like one of the most successful comic book creators in like the last 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I only have a few of her books left to read, which is disappointing to me. Like, because I also read Drama recently.
Oh, okay. I've heard that one's really good.
It's very good. I liked her memoirs better, but I also, I don't know. I like memoir comics a lot. Like as a genre, like I really like that as a a form of storytelling for comics. So anyway, how about you guys? What did you read?
Yeah, Paul, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
Comic books have been numerous. I am woefully behind on my weekly comics, so I'm struggling to catch up. But luckily, for those wondering, the West Michigan weather report, it is terrible outside, so I'm going to stay in and catch up this afternoon. So it worked out in my favor.
Somewhere Nick's ears are burning. He knows that someone was talking about Michigan weather.
Dreary would be my adjective for today. And another reason I've been behind on comics is that I've been reading a ton of Judge Dredd comics, which probably is not a surprise to anybody that listens to the show regularly, but I've been reading more recent Judge Dredd. So I just finished reading the massive Day of Chaos story that John Wagner wrote. That ran from 2011 to 2012 in Judge Dredd. And that was a story that, I guess, spoiler alerts for a 10-year-old story, ends with a deadly virus infecting Mega City 1 during an election season. So, total fiction, right?
Oh, no.
And it ends up that 90% of the citizens of Mega City 1 die. Like, it devastates the city.
Yikes.
The city's almost completely destroyed. And there's a weird implication at the end of the story that it might have all been Dredd's fault, which I kind of love. But anyway, I read the follow-up story, which is Trifecta, which I thought was even more interesting. The Trifecta story kind of weaves through 3 different 2000 AD strips. You have the Judge Dredd story is written by Al Ewing with art by Henry Flint. And then there's a story called The Simping Detective, about an undercover detective in Mega City 1 who's also an undercover judge, private detective, and a simp, which in Mega City 1 means someone who dresses like a clown and acts like an idiot or a simpleton. So
what the heck?
Yes, it's a whole thing. So that's written by Cy Spurrier with art by Simon Colby, and introduces the quote unquote Church of Simpology, which is a whole religion based around being a simpleton. So there's that. And then the third story is Low Life by Rob Williams and Disraeli. That's about an undercover part of the Wally Squad, which is the undercover division of the judge system. That's Dirty Frank uncovering a plot by a massive corporation to take over Mega City 1. They built a giant city on the moon that's shaped like a shark, and they're going to launch that at Mega City 1 and land on top of the city. Like, that's the plot. So...
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, as a British comic book writer, is it just a rite of passage to at some point write Judge Dredd? Because Cy Spurrier, Al Ewing, Rob Williams, I can't. Now I'm like, has Kieran Gillen written Judge Dredd? Has Grant Morrison written Judge Dredd? Like, what other British authors or creators do I know that have they worked on Judge Dredd? Is it just a thing you do? It's crazy.
It's like you said, it's a rite of passage. Morrison, Miller, and even Garth Ennis. They all had brief stints on Judge Dredd before they came over to America. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I haven't read a ton of that stuff. But yeah, it is kind of like you work at 2000 AD, and of course you have the one Judge Dredd story you want to tell, and you do that, and then you get hired by DC or Marvel. That's just how it worked for a while. So,
yeah.
But anyway, I like this type of story because it's not just Dredd-centric. You get other characters being involved, and the way the story evolves, you have the 3 different writers telling stories happening at the same time, but it's part of a big plot to take over Mega City 1, or what's left of it. But what's interesting is that because Judge Dredd never has been rebooted, they're able to kind of do retcons in continuity. So it's like, oh yeah, there's this whole Black Ops division of the Justice Department we've never talked about because it's super secretive. And the person in charge of that is now trying to overthrow the city and the judges. So it's like, you can introduce characters and say, oh, that character's been around for decades, but we just never talked about him. And now here they're finally doing something we have to stop. So the way the story sort of concludes, you have the 3 stories that kind of merge into one at the end. I thought was a really cool story development, and it felt different from a lot of other Judge Dredd stories I read. So I really dug it. And again, to have different writers and to have different takes on Mega City 1, it's very funny at parts. The simping detective is a hilarious character. You have Dirty Frank is a hilarious character, and he runs into a sensitive Clegg, which Mike, you'll appreciate since you know who the Clegg are, those terrifying aliens. He finds one that's actually a sensitive Clegg that helps him out. So
okay.
It's good stuff. I mean, again, I think Judge Dredd is daunting because it's a 40-year-old story that's never been rebooted, but stories like this, I think, are easy to jump into and enjoy. And of course, you will get hooked just like I did and keep reading. So
I love it.
And so other than that, I've been trying to pick up my stuff and get caught up. I did make a point to read the final issue of Batman the Three Jokers. So Batman Three Jokers #3, written by Jeff Johns, art by Jason Fabok, and Brad Anderson does the colors. I got a one-word review for this, and that's woof. I don't. It's a comic book. Batman's in it. Jason Fabok is a great artist, and I think I should maybe leave it at that. So, if you want to know more,
Paul,
I can.
That was the most scathing Paul review I've ever heard.
Yeah, same.
It's. I'll just say this. Maybe it's time to reevaluate the importance of the Killing Joke as a comic. You know what I mean? Like we talk about the negative legacy of Watchmen. I think Alan Moore's Killing Joke had a far more poisonous influence on contemporary comics than Watchmen. So
Interesting.
yeah. It's a book that I'm kind of glad I read just because it was an event. I think Jeff Johns has some interesting ideas. I don't think they're very well executed. But like I said, Jason Fabok draws a fantastic Batman. So yeah, when it shows up on Hoopla, sure, take time for it. But other than that, you can probably wait.
All right. Well, I'm not going to poke and prod you anymore about that. And instead, I'm going to... I'll give a quick update here. I've been doing okay. It's been raining because the the aftermath of Hurricane Zeta, I think, are like hitting New York City. So it's just been raining. But I don't leave the house anyways. It's just I get to see the rain outside the window, which is nice. It's a little bit of change compared to like the regular sunny days. What is time? But beyond that, I actually have been reading some comics. I was saying before we started recording that I've been reading a lot of Rick and Morty comics, and I don't want to talk about that because they're not great, and I don't, whatever. But I will talk about this book that I read called Stillwater. Stillwater #1. This is by Chip Zdarsky with art by Ramon K. Perez with colors by Mike Spicer. And this book seems ultra strange in that I don't know what to think about it. There's a mystery about people who can't die if they're inside the city border. And what does that mean? And we need to find out. That's kind of like the high level overview of the first issue. The second issue I know just came out. I'm probably going to trade weight this because I don't like to follow mystery stories week to week. I just don't think that works very well. So I'd rather just read it as a trade. So yeah, it's pretty good though. I think it's a good looking book, and the premise seems like pretty fun. It's very aggressive and in your face about like something's happening here, and you don't really have to suss a lot of things out. Like it's right in your face about that. So very excited to see where this book goes when it hits the trade. Otherwise I just want to give my One Piece update. So Xander, you go ahead and roll the clip.
Luffy, help us now. Okay, I'm on my way right now.
I am at chapter 965. I've been, like I said, slowly catching up. Jeff in our Discord just hit chapter 900, so he's very close. And I think anybody else out there, I think there's like 7 weeks left. If you read 100 chapters a day for the next 7 weeks, or 100 chapters a week for the next 7 weeks, you too can also be caught up. One Piece is great. They're still in Wano. If for anybody who's watching or reading this, still in the same arc. They've been in for the past 50 chapters, and from what I understand, they don't leave it before chapter 1000. I think it's all going to come to a culmination in chapter 1000. So I'm very excited about that. But anyways, let's talk about comic books that are coming out pretty soon. Comic books are dropping on November 4th, 2020. What are you both excited for this week? I'm going to bounce back over to you, Paul.
This is an interesting week. There's a few books that pique my interest, but the books I talk about a lot. So my pick is going to be DCeased, Dead Planet #5. I know we've talked about DCeased a lot on the show. I know Brian's reading it and raving about it. I really enjoy it too. This is the sort of zombie story, alternate reality zombie story that Tom Taylor's writing. Art by Trevor Hairsine. There's only so much you can do with zombies. So I'm really surprised that Taylor's been able to tell an engaging, surprising zombie story. And this is the third volume of the story, and it kind of has no end in sight. Like he's been able to kind of tease this stuff along and make it interesting the whole time. What I really appreciate about DCeased is particularly this take on it, the Dead Planet one, is that they are leaning into the sort of Kirby-esque New Gods root of the story, which is the reason I picked up the first issue of DCeased way back when it came out, because it's not just zombies. It's the anti-life equation that Darkseid was looking for that infects humanity and turns them into these zombie-like creatures. So you have the anti-life equation, you have Darkseid. The previous issue of Dead Planet, they go to New Genesis to find the life equation to cure everybody using the Mobius chair. There's boom tubes and mother boxes. You're speaking my language if you're talking that kind of Kirby New God stuff, you know?
What language are you speaking, though, Paul?
Oh, Mike, there's a whole world for you to explore.
I read Mr. Miracle. I know what some of those words are.
Sure,
that's where I'm coming from too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the stuff I like. So it's a part of the DC universe that when you dip your toes into, it's really fascinating, and few writers really give it the attention it deserves, I think. And I appreciate Tom Taylor using that as a basis for the story. Without spoiling anything, if you haven't read the last issue of Dead Planet or you're waiting to catch up, the big cliffhanger of the last issue was the big bad in DC who you never want to see turned into a zombie. So I'm very excited to see how bad things are going to get.
Are zombies back in vogue? Did I miss this? Is this something in comics that are like we back in pop culture to being into zombies?
Well, look, I mean, Walking Dead ended, so DC was like, look, there's the hole to fill, you know, Walking Dead's gone. Somebody needs their zombie fix. So.
Yeah, we just did a whole episode about this. You know, we don't know. It's a constant wave and flow, and there's a whole article about this. I think I linked it in the show notes for that episode. That's like
I actually checked that out. It was really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like based on the current regime or whoever's ruling in the United States will determine if zombies are popular or whatever. Like, I love that idea.
Tracks. Yeah, that tracks. I mean, I one thing I do like about DCeased is that it's a zombie-esque story. You know, they're not literally zombies. There's a hint that you could save them since they're just infected with the anti-life equation. But the idea of flesh-eating monsters, I guess, is still at the root of the story. So yeah. They're quote unquote zombies. You know.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, I one of these days, this is another one of those things, and I'm like, maybe I'll just sit down and read all this. But I've heard, unlike, you know, metal and stuff like that, I've actually heard DCeased is supposed to be pretty good.
It's really good.
I know Danny out there is listening, is you know, turning over in his chair. He's very upset at me right now for saying that, but I've heard good things about DCeased regardless.
I have, in terms of DC, which I usually never read because I haven't in forever. I was into New 52 for a hot year when it was the new thing, and I was reading new volumes of that. But otherwise, I haven't read DC in forever. But the Laurie Halse Anderson Wonder Woman trade finally showed up on my hold. I finally got it as one of my library pickups, and I am excited for that.
Nice, very nice.
Have either of you read that one?
I have not had a chance to read that yet.
No.
That'll be my next thing I come on the show to talk about then.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, speaking of that, what are you excited for this upcoming week?
So I scoured the list looking for things that would be a good jumping on point, and I went, man, I'm glad that the topic this week is what Kate should read, like what's good in comics right now, because I had a hard time finding something. So I decided to go with Crossover #1 because it is a #1 in its image, and so that right there says good things to me, and there's a plug line from Scott Snyder telling me it's good, which more often than not is a good sign in terms of my interests intersecting with what he seems to review well. So this is by Donny Cates writing and artist D. Cuniff, if I'm pronouncing that one correctly, and Geoff Shaw. And it's about so it's a little confusing. I think they're trying not to give it away. The tagline says, imagine everything you thought was a fantasy was real, and now join us in a world where reality is dead and anything is possible. But the preview pages, that doesn't tell you anything. But the preview pages, it's stories and myths are all true. And they're not just true, but they're a virus and they're spreading. And you get this big, cool artist page of all these superheroes and monsters, kind of going out attacking a city. And the whole anything to do with stories and myths as like a central thing and like talking about those and how they affect us, I tend to be a sucker for. So that seems up my alley, but I really am very much out of my element in that I have not been paying attention to new release comics in well over a year at this point. So don't go out and buy this on my account. Like,
well,
talk to your friends who know more than I do.
In your defense, this is a Donny Cates and Jeff Shaw book, which
looks solid. The art looks nice.
Yeah. This is, I mean, in Donny Cates, Jeff Shaw. I don't know if D. Cuniff has done work with them before, but you know, this is the same team that brought you God Country and the Paybacks, and like those were books that were for all intents and purposes pretty much well received and done, you know, highly reviewed. So I think this is a safe bet, especially coming from Image. It doesn't have to do anything with Null or fucking Venom, so I think we're probably safe, because that's all the Donny Cates seems to be doing right now over at Marvel.
I never finished God Country, but I did like the few issues that I read of it, and I perpetually am in meaning to go back and finish it. So I think if I had to go out, if I didn't have friends to talk to and was trying to get back into comics right now, I would, of new comics. I mean, I've still been into comics, but definitely the library like backlist. But I think this is what I'd go pick up.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike?
Well, for me, this week was weird. I have some books coming out. There's obviously all the X-Men books. Dawn of X is still upon us. The sun seems to never fucking rise on this story. No, I'm not trying to be garbage about it. I actually haven't. I'm a little bit behind on those, so I don't want to talk about any of those Dawn of X books because I am still excited. I'm still reading, really hyped. But the book that I will talk about this week that I'm excited for is Sweet Tooth: The Return #1. This is written and drawn by Jeff Lemire with colors by Jose Villarrubia. And I don't know about you, or anybody out there listening, but I loved Sweet Tooth, the original series that Jeff Lemire did way back in the day. Now, I will say the one caveat to that is I hated the idea of Sweet Tooth when it was first coming out. When it was first announced and it was in the back of every fucking book that I saw, there were ads for it everywhere, I think, on the internet.
Yeah, there were.
I just remember being like, man, fuck this antler kid. Like... And then years later, it was all out, and I grabbed it all, and I don't remember how I read it. I read it in some capacity, and I read it all from beginning to end, and I cried like a baby. I genuinely have only cried reading a handful of comics, and this was one of them. The end of it was so perfect. It was so well done. Broke my heart. It was wonderful. And so, now I love Sweet Tooth. I'm sorry for what I had done in the past. I've changed. I've learned. I'm trying to, give back to the world. I messed up. But so I'm excited about this new #1. But I do have a question about what it is. I'm going to read you guys the synopsis that you can get from the internet. Sweet Tooth: The Return is a no rehash of the original series, but rather a bold reimagining of the Sweet Tooth mythology, taking elements of the original series and remixing them into something familiar but totally new. A divided world, a planet long ago past the point of devastation, and at the center of it all, a child who didn't ask to be born into any of this, but who has no choice but to try and forge some life for himself. His visions and dreams may not be real at all. They may just be fiction, but they are hope, and sometimes hope is enough. So, I'm confused because this book already came out. But I ask myself in my notes here, is Lemire doing fan fiction of his own work? Is this allowed? So I don't know. I'm excited for this book.
If Stephanie Meyer can do Twilight, the reimagining from whatever it was, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
This is allowed now. I don't have to be okay with it, but it is a thing.
Yeah. I mean, that being said, I'm not trying to like shit on the book because I am excited. I am really curious to know what Jeff Lemire is going to bring to the table for this series that I think is very sacred to a lot of people and is very, very good. I read it. I love it. To this day, I still have very fond memories of reading that book and how touching it was and how well put together it was. So I'm really curious to see what this is, but I'm going to be completely honest. I'm trade waiting this because I can't do month to month with a story like this.
Yeah.
I need to be able to binge it. So probably going to trade wait it, but nonetheless, I'll probably grab #1 just to see what it's all about. And then just wait for the rest. But yeah, I'm very excited for this book. Did you guys read Sweet Tooth at all?
No.
I was going to say, I'll have to read it at some point. I remember buying the first issue when it came out, because that's when I think Vertigo, all of their first issues were $1 at that point. They were kind of doing that. So I grabbed the first issue when it came out. And I'd only read Essex County trilogy by Jeff Lemire, which I really like, and I still think is my favorite thing he's ever done. But I remember reading this and finding it again, it was that thing where like, this is good, but there's no way I can buy this month to month because of the pacing and just the style of story it is, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I had a similar reaction to you, Mike, where just like, this looks just a little bit too twee or precious for me based on the artwork. So I never went back to read more of it. So,
well, I highly recommend it. I honestly, like, I made a mistake. It's a very, very good book.
Okay. I'll try it.
Yeah, I mean, if you can borrow it, borrow it. I mean, I think that this is one of those things where, like, you can get the collections on sale sometimes for really cheap, but
yeah.
I also think it's worth full price. Like, it's one of those books that I've been waiting to have more shelf space so I can buy, like, physical copies of because I want it, like that badly. But anyways, yeah, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to be answering the question that Kate asked myself and Paul, which is, what are some of the best comics to be reading right now? And we have answers. So we'll be back in just a second.
So today we had the first snow in East Lansing, Michigan, where I live, and the numbers of the big bad scary thing are ticking up and the temperature is ticking down, and I'm getting ready to hibernate. And what I really need, I realize, is comics in my life to talk about and celebrate with my friends and to escape into, to metaphorically escape the four walls of my tiny, tiny apartment that I'm definitely going to be cooped up in. And the thing is that I have been so out of comics because of grad school for so long that I don't even know where to begin, and it's really overwhelming. And while I want to support local shops and stuff like that so that they are here when everything goes back to real life and we can go just browse shops again, I don't want to go in and browse, like, so I need to call them and be like, here's the thing I want, can you give it to me at your curbside? And so I'm hoping that you guys have some suggestions of what's good right now, what's worth picking up, and what is good escapist, like good enough that it'll suck me in so that I can not think about anything that's happening in real life for the 30 minutes it takes me to read it.
Sure.
Okay, I mean, Paul, you've brought two of the best people on the show. I realized.
Yeah, it was a real good confluence of fates here.
Yeah, so I mean, I've got a huge list, and mine's all over the board. For some reason, I was looking through my notes, and it was just like manga.
For some reason, says the man on what was it, number 900 something,
965 of One Piece. I mean, I think over the years, I've come to realize that like there's a lot more out there than just Western comics, and that's good. And I think that we all should experience more. Like, we should all be reading more European comics that are translated. Yeah. We should be reading more manga. It's like there are some very, very, very good stories out there. So, I guess just to kick things off, I will recommend the number one book that is in my pocket, which is Hat Atelier. This is by Kamomi Shirahama, and this is a book about a magical world where a little girl, she wants to learn about magic. She thinks magic's great. She accidentally casts a spell that turns her mother to stone, and she's devastated by it. And in the time that happens, she is then whisked away by this. He's this witch, a trainer, essentially. He's like a teacher, and he says, you can come to my atelier where I'm training other witches to be actual witches. And since you know the secret about being a witch and casting magic, I'm going to train you. Otherwise, these people are going to erase your memory and make you forget whatever happened. And she says, okay. And this book is so nice, and it's so happy, and it's all about like the love and craft of drawing, but it's also about magic and the whimsical nature of magic. I just read volume 6 a couple weeks ago, and if you thought that like Harry Potter was cool, like the first Harry Potter book, yeah, I think imagine all of the wonder and fun of Harry Potter, but instead of being jokey, it's actually like practical. And so like every time there's something super majestic happening in the story, or the characters discover something, it's not just, wow, look, that funny frog is now jumping out the window. It's like, that frog came to life and it serves a purpose in this world now. Like it seems very serious, but it's also like it fills you with just joy because the characters in the story are all little girls. Like they're like 10, 11, 12-year-old girls, and they understand like the whimsy and like innocence of the world. And so the adults they interact with are very serious because magic has consequences, but they're all bright and burgeoning, and
she's
they
like,
want to.
I know, I killed my mother.
Well, yeah, exactly. And she's very broken up about it, and it's so good. It's from beginning to end. Every volume is like a very delicate treat that you get to take in. And I wish that there was more. It comes out very slowly because I think it's a monthly book in Japan, and then they have to wait to translate it and so on and so forth. But 6 volumes of this are out, and it is fantastic from beginning to end.
Okay, I'm sold.
Yes, I did it. Top that, Paul.
That's one for Mike. All right, let's see what I got. It's funny, Kate, you were saying escapism, and I'm looking at some of the stuff I recommend. It's maybe a little too close to home, given what's going on right now.
Kent State. I'm not reading about Kent State right now. Are you insane?
Yeah, I'm doubting, second guessing some of these suggestions in light of that. But if you want something lighthearted and fun, I do recommend Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, which is a 12-issue series that Matt Fraction wrote with art by Steve Lieber, colors by Nathan Fairburn. The trade collection of it just came out this past week, so you can grab it right now and read all of it. It's so much fun. It's a Jimmy Olsen comic, but what's interesting is that Matt Fraction went back to the old sort of Silver Age Jimmy Olsen idea where Jimmy Olsen's turning into a giant turtle for some reason, or there's all sorts of strange things happening. We know we like turtles, and especially. What's interesting about this book, though, is that it's on one hand an homage to those comics. At the same time, they're capturing that same sort of feel with a sort of modern twist without it being ironic, if that makes sense. It's not meta so much as it is. There's a structure and a rhythm to those comics from the 60s, and we're trying to recreate that, but we know what we're doing. You know what I mean? That makes sense? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about comic book formalism, I think nowadays people just assume that means a 9-panel grid. Thanks, Watchmen. Yeah. But what's great is that Steve Lieber kind of does a formalist thing with the artwork that doesn't rely on that. It feels like you're looking at it like this is him experimenting with the medium of comics without being self-aware about that. So, and then you also have incredibly dumb, funny jokes. It's Jimmy Olsen trying to escape assassination. He sets up a YouTube channel where he's trying to get viral videos to go online. And he runs across Batman, who's a total grump. It's one of the funniest takes on Batman I've read in a long time in this book.
Awesome.
And the ending ends in a way that resets the status quo for the Daily Planet in a way that I hope sticks. So even though it's a fun, frivolous book, there's an ending to it that I think is really interesting if they stick with it going forward in the Superman books. I don't know if they do, but so even if you have a passing interest in Superman or Jimmy Olsen, I think you'll find somebody to enjoy in this book. So yeah.
And I do like Matt Fraction a lot.
Yeah, the clips I've seen from this look very hilarious, like previews and stuff like that. This book looks like a ton of fun, and I've been waiting for the trade before I read it. So yeah, thank you for the suggestion for me too, Paul. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and it's fun too because Matt Fraction is one of those writers where he runs hot and cold for me. Where sometimes I think it's so smart and well done, and other times he almost feels like he's not fully invested. He's 100% on board with this. He's having so much fun writing this comic, and it comes through on the page. So highly recommend.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I have another suggestion. I wasn't trying to make this into a competition. I realized I set things up.
I was. Let's go.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, let's do this. I'm gonna throw a curveball then. Because I got some aces, but you know what? I'll throw a curveball in here. One of the books that I really really like. This is it's by Box Brown. It's Child Star. This is his semi-fictional, pretty fictional story about this child actor who basically it's a documentary that follows his life, but in comic book form. And it's like one of those documentaries that you watch where you kind of fall in and you go like, is there any hope? Is there any light at the end of this tunnel? And like as you're reading the story, since you don't know who this person is, you kind of don't know how it ends to an extent, which I thought was a really interesting way to tell this story. And if, I'm not like super well versed in like the last 50 years of pop culture, so if this is highly based on someone, I have no idea. But I could see bits and pieces. Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, it's Box Brown's. It seems like he wanted to do a biocomic about Gary Coleman, but without getting the rights to it. You know what I mean? It's the Gary Coleman story. Childhood actor on sitcoms, gets commercialized, gets successful, how that sort of ruins his life. So it's basically the Gary Coleman story in, with a fictional stand-in. So yeah. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book too. So yeah.
But yeah, that being said, I mean, it's kind of depressing, but it's also like, since it is fictional, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't follow Gary Coleman's life like one-to-one. There are like twists and bits and pieces you can kind of pull from other child actors and other tropes from like the 80s, where you see like people trying to make success beyond the one sitcom that made them popular, and they kind of fall apart because of it. So it's a really interesting, like, I think, just, magnifying glass on the way that we treat people in pop culture, and then what happens to them, and how if you don't see things behind the scenes, everything seems really crazy until something like this comes out. I thought it was a beautiful book, like from beginning to end. I couldn't stop reading it, but that's most Box Brown books for me.
I was gonna say, has he had a bad one yet?
I mean, the Charlie Kaufman book, or not Andy Kaufman book, was okay, but that was only because I kind of already knew a lot about that story, so there wasn't a lot to like unfold for me. He did take things in a slightly different direction, because I think he's one of the few people to actually get an interview with Andy Kaufman's family about his story, which I actually like put things into a different light for me. But if you've seen things like Man in the Moon, and I think there was another documentary about him, they all have kind of contradicting ends. So it's really, you don't know who to believe, does that add to the Charlie or the Andy Kaufman mythos? Like, but yeah, I mean, that was the only one that was maybe on like it was an 8 out of 10 instead of a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10,
I even heard about this one. So
yeah, that one came out like super under the radar.
Huh.
Yeah.
But I've heard a lot about the Child Star one. I've followed some newsletters and podcasts about books in general that then sometimes have these kind of Box Brown books seem to be make their way into normal book world, not normal, quote unquote, but like the prose world more than some of the other ones, in the same way that like the Raina Telgemeier books are talked about, because they're just like they're Barnes and Noble end caps, like.
Yeah, that's because when your distributor is like HarperCollins, or First Second, I think works with Macmillan or something, that's how that happens. But, yeah.
So, but no, I've heard really, really good things about this one, so I'll put it on the list.
Yeah. I mean, Paul, were you saying I didn't mean to cut you off about the Andy Kaufman book.
I actually really like that one because, it kind of followed, it's almost a companion piece to the Andre the Giant book, where, Box Brown is saying, we're talking about pro wrestling in a way because it's an art form that blurs reality and fiction. Andy Kaufman did the same thing with his real life and his comedy, and he's also a big wrestling fan. So it's like, it's unreliable narration in a way where it's like, we don't really know what's true or not. And that kind of made a really interesting book. On the other hand, I thought his cannabis book was educational, but it lacked that sort of, questioning of like, is this true or not? Right. That was basically a straightforward book about the history of the criminalization of marijuana.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah, so I think that one I found a little underwhelming, but again, I like his art style and the way he tells stories so much. It was still enjoyable. So,
yeah, that book is wild because it definitely feels like Box Brown just being pissed, and he's just like, let's set the fucking record straight. I like weed, and also you all have it wrong.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, still, Child Star. I mean, again, it's really hard to go wrong with a Box Brown book, because they're all very well done. Like, just period. Like, the guy knows what he's doing. And again, this is Raina Telgemeier.
The craft,
and these people know how to make OGNs, and they know how to make them very well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess maybe we shouldn't put these people on the list. It's too easy.
Give me a deep cut, Paul.
A deep cut. Well, here's one I actually picked up this week. I have not read the whole book yet, but I'm very excited to. It's I Want You. It's a collection of comics by Lisa Hannawalt, who I think I've talked about on the show before. If you don't know Lisa's work, you at least recognize it because she did all the character designs for BoJack Horseman.
Ooh.
But she does her own comics. She did a lot of them are sort of almost like diaries, where it's just like small little comics that she does, or sometimes she'll do articles for magazines that are illustrated, and those will be collected. She did not a prose book. What's the word? A fictional book that tells a story called Coyote Dog Girl, which came out a couple years ago, which I really enjoyed. Anyway, this new book, I Want You, is a collection of zines that she published before her career took off. So it's stuff that she did in her 20s. And what I like about Lisa Hanawalt's work is that it's almost like you get a straight dose of her id. It's like she doesn't think too much about stuff. A lot of the comics are sort of bawdy and silly. They can be gross sometimes, but it's almost just like there's no filter between her brain and what ends up on the page. And the way she kind of does that and able to get some distance from her work is she draws a lot of anthropomorphic animals. So you get, these sort of, you get poop jokes, you get sex jokes, but it's told by people with animal heads and bodies. You know what I mean? It's like this weird mishmash of stuff that I really appreciate, because I think a lot of creators are precious about their work, and you don't get that sense from her. Again, like I'm saying, it's a straight dose of what was on her brain when she sat down in front of a blank page. And I really appreciate that, the immediacy, especially since these are stories that she did as zines, where it's like you maybe don't have to worry about a big audience and you kind of be a little bit more loose with your work. So I'm just flipping through the book right now, and yeah, it might not be everyone's cup of tea, because it is a little some blue humor, to put it mildly, but I really enjoy that. So I think it's worth a look.
Yeah. This is from Drawn and Quarterly?
Yes, they collected this stuff. Yep. And it just came out last week, so I just grabbed it from the shop. So
yeah, those publishers like Drawn and Quarterly and Fantagraphics, sometimes they put out collections for stuff, and I'm just like, fucking, where do you find these people? Like,
Yeah.
And like that's really weird for me to say, but like I would have never, I don't think I would have heard of Lisa Hanawalt if it wasn't for a publisher like this collecting her work. That's unfortunate, but like the comics world is huge, and so it's good to see this kind of stuff getting put together, even if it's like just zines and things like that, like reprints for someone like you or I or Kate to take home and put it on our shelf, where we normally probably would never have had access to any of that.
Yeah, and especially since it's work that's not explicitly serialized. It's not a work that's telling a story. You know what I mean? It's just random short little comics. You know what I mean? So it's something you can just pick up off the shelf, open to a random page, get a chuckle, and then put it back. And maybe a nice distraction from everything else at times. So
That sounds perfect.
Definitely.
Good. There you go.
So
Top that, Mike. That's a deep cut.
Shit. Okay. Let's see. Geez, now I got to go through my list again. Okay, so I did pick some webtoons. I feel like that's cheating.
It's
because
not, though,
webtoon,
because it's so convenient having, like, when you're hunkered down to just go on there and have them. I love that.
right,
that
and
app.
that's kind of why I feel like it's cheating. But okay, so I'm going to talk about this book that Nick turned me on to. We may have talked about it on the show before, but it's Empira or Imperia. I don't know how to say the name, but it's essentially like a fantasy story where there's some steampunk elements and there's like fantasy elements, and there's like wisp-o-willows and pixies and sprites and stuff, and some people can see magical people and some people can't, and the line work is incredibly beautiful. Like the whole story is like sad hot boys and fantasy sprites, and there's one girl, and there's like a whole royal wedding like thing. I've been reading this book on and off, or this webtoon like on and off for like the last year and a half, because there've been like massive breaks. And right now there's in the story there's this big royal like connection of people where they're trying to match make this one prince and this other princess, or maybe they won't and maybe they will, but then there's another girl who's been like, she snuck into the palace. It's a wild book, and I'm not doing it justice, but the art alone will sell you. Like, if you just look at the first chapter of this, you're going to be on the floor with how beautiful the people are in this book, and then after that the content doesn't matter. You're just looking at beautiful people.
I just had this conversation yesterday with someone I was handing off. So we did socially distant pumpkin carving, where we basically yelled across a yard at each other while separately carving pumpkins.
Sure.
And wearing masks and everything. And I brought on a sunbeam that we talked about on the show to him.
Yeah.
And was like, you have to read this. And I was having that talk about, like, listen, the story it's going to meander, but the art will make you not care what's happening in the story. It's just so good. Like, look at the first page and you'll read it. And he is not usually a comics reader, but I think he'll read it because of that. It's just so gorgeous.
I mean, you see the flying fish ship in that book.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're sold, right? But so Imperia is interesting. There is more to it. There's some really good character building. That people have like dark brooding histories where some bad shit happened and they're just trying to survive. But it's good. I think it's a pretty easy read, and the art is incredibly pretty. It's not just the people. The art is very well done. Like at one point there's a break because the artist had like some hand surgery, and I was like, sweet God, we cannot lose this person. Where do I have to put money to make sure that their hand is okay? It's a very, very well done book though.
Okay.
And it's on Webtoon, so it's, quote unquote free.
Sold.
So, boom, try it. Your turn, Paul. What do you got?
Well,
I know you got Kent State on your list. I dare you to try to pitch it. I think you can.
I will say I'm halfway through Kent State, which is the new book by Durf Backdurf, who everyone knows from My Friend Dahmer.
Which is a fantastic book. It's just like I might need to sit on this recommendation for like 2 or 3 years.
Maybe like we'll see how the next couple of weeks play out.
Yeah.
My short pitch will be I'm in the same boat. I'm actually kind of trying to savor this book. I got it and started to tear into it. It's so well done, so well researched. I mean, he gets deep into the people that were involved in the Kent State shooting in 1970. He does a good job exploring what the cultural atmosphere of the country was at the time, particularly in Ohio, where Kent State was. So I'm really sort of letting myself read it bit by bit, piece by piece, to fully absorb all of the work that went into it. It's a big book. It'll take you a while to read. So yeah, but it's also one that maybe too close to the surface, given the current political situation.
We'll see what Florida does. If Florida is kind to us, we might be picking up this book soon.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, this book is so big that you can just crush your fingers with it to try to like ignore everything else that's happening with the world.
That's true.
It's like one of the biggest books on my shelf right now. It's humongous, which I'm glad to have like that Durf Backdurf art like in huge pages. But man, it's big.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a treat. It's an investment both in money and time wise. So yeah. Mike, there's a couple of things that we both have on our lists. Maybe we should get those out of the way.
Yeah.
I would say one of them is also kind of like pretty contemporarily relevant, and that's Far Sector, the Green Lantern book, written by N.K. Jemisin with art by Jamal Campbell. And I'm going to take credit for this one because I'm the one that recommended it to you, Mike. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Even if you're not a Green Lantern fan or know much about Green Lantern, you can jump onto this book. I think issue 9 is coming out this week, so the first trade shouldn't be too far away. I think it's only a 12-issue limited series. But it's about a new Green Lantern who goes to a far distant part of the universe to police a planet that's existed peacefully for 500 years, 3 different races all living together. But someone ends up murdered for the first time in 500 years, and she has to investigate the murder with little, to go on. And there's the undercurrent that the reason these 3 races have been able to live together is that there's whether it's a drug or something that's suppressing individual emotions. So no one actually has emotions,
Yeah, they say it's like a genetic thing that they put into the people so that they suppress their emotions, because the reason why there was so much conflict in this area before is because there was a lot of just rage and anger, that people were really short-tempered and stuff. And so suppressing it has allowed them to live quote unquote peacefully for the last however many years.
So then you have the Green Lantern showing up, whose entire power is based on emotion, obviously. And then underneath that, you have the implications. They haven't dug too deep into it, but there's some implied history to this Green Lantern who's from Earth and was a police officer dealing with racial injustice and, distrust of the police. So it is a book that's dealing with contemporary modern issues of race and police brutality in a science fiction setting, a hard sci-fi setting. So yeah. And that's what good sci-fi does. And I think this is a fantastic example of it. It's also one of the prettiest looking books coming out. It is a gorgeous looking artwork. So,
oh my gosh, I mean, this is, I don't know if Kate, you've probably heard N.K. Jemisin.
Yeah.
Like, she's the author on this book, so like, you're already
nice.
there, like in terms of quality.
Yeah.
In the bar, like the bar is very high. Like, she's a fantastic writer, and then she's doing this comic book with Jamal Campbell, and it's like 1-2 punch of just perfectly crafted comics, as far as I'm concerned. I can't wait to get this in like a hardcover or collected edition. Like, I've been buying it digitally, but I'm going to get a physical copy of this book. It's such a fantastic read.
Cool. Yeah, I have not actually read her stuff. I just have it because I know that I should read it and want to read it, especially the Broken Earth trilogy, but I have not gotten to it yet. I am in the end stages of the Pop Sugar 2020 reading challenge, which means that I no longer can just read stuff and assume there will be a category it fits into for my checklist. I now have to carefully pick what I'm reading so that
so you can check the boxes on the bingo card.
Exactly. Like, I'm almost certainly about to pick up as my next comic read Genderqueer, because I need a non-binary author still as one of my
God, that book's so good though.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. So I need something set in Japan, so maybe I'll take one of Mike's manga picks out here.
Okay, all right. You know what? This is what we're gonna do. I know we gotta talk about Immortal Hulk. Kate, you should just read Immortal Hulk. The end. It's great. Boom, done.
No, wait, you have to justify that because there's some dumb Hulk stuff out there.
No, okay, all right, really quick, because I do want to get to this other pick that I have. So I'm going to do 2 in a row really quick. But so Immortal Hulk is the best horror comic you could probably pick up right now, or at least the first arc of it. It's about Bruce Banner, but it's also about the Hulk, but it's also about the entire history of the Hulk and how everything that he's done and everything that's happened to him has played out in such a way to create the scenario that he's in right now, which sounds very obvious, but when we're talking about Marvel continuity, that doesn't make any fucking sense. And Al Ewing has somehow made it all make sense. And as someone who's read some Hulk, not all Hulk, he really puts you in the position to say, don't worry about the history. I'll explain what you need to know, and I'm not going to do it in a condescending way. I'm not going to do it in an Easter eggy way. I'm just going to lay it out to you. I'm going to explain why things have worked and why they haven't worked. And also I'm going to do some very gross body horror Cronenberg style shit that is just going to weird you out. Like, I'll be completely honest. There's some gross scenes.
Okay.
But it's very good. Like, it's all done in a way to do the horror stuff that you would expect out of a like Cronenberg style film. And then on top of that, he does some really interesting things with the idea of life and death and what that means for someone like the Hulk, who seems to be unable to die. So it's very good. It's very, 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 very good.
It's one of my favorite comics coming out right now. And the Hulk is a character I've always loved, but I've never read much. I've always liked the idea of the Hulk more than actual Hulk comics, you know?
Yeah.
And the fact that with this, I'm really getting a deeper sense of the character. I didn't realize there were so many daddy issues involved in Bruce Banner's life. And he really explores that stuff. So for me, it's been an education in the history of the Hulk. At the same time, it's been feels like a fresh, unique take on the character. So I cannot recommend that book more. I recommend that book to everybody. And I think it's easily one of the best comics coming out right today.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. Like, I read a lot of like Planet Hulk, and I read the World War Hulk stuff, and I kind of fell off of the Hulk stuff probably like 6, 7, 8 years ago. And then to pick this up and feel like, he's including everything. He's really trying to make this all work, and he's also telling a compelling story. It's not just a history rehash. It's like the history is important to the bigger story that's going on, and that bigger story is constantly getting amped up and adding more layers, and it's very interesting, and it's for the most part very easy to follow too. That is the one thing I will say. Al Ewing, it makes it very clear what's happening every single issue, and I really appreciate that, because with a book like this, trying to involve so much continuity at once, you could really get lost in the weeds. And he definitely makes sure that it's clear what's going on, at least arc to arc. I think reading it month to month, I've noticed it's a little bit harder to follow than like binge reading some of the back issues. But even then, I would say it's not as hard to follow as like a Jonathan Hickman book or some Kieran Gillen books.
Marvel
and stuff. So,
also usually does a good job with the like synopsis at the beginning.
Yes, that's true. So yeah, read Immortal Hulk, the end. We're moving on. I got to talk about this book that takes place in Japan, and it's fantastic.
Okay.
It's perfect,
Here
and
we
it's
go.
probably the funniest comic book that you can ever read. This is The Way of the House Husband. This is by Kosuke Ono, and it is a comic book that follows a super assassin for the Yakuza turned house husband and what he does in his daily life. And that may not sound interesting to you, but I tell you, it is the funniest thing you could ever read, because while he is a house husband who's just making dinner for his wife or going out and shopping or getting tea with the other housewives in the neighborhood, everything he describes like someone who is talking about murder and death and killing people. So when he's talking about, I had to find the guy, and I got him in the corner, and I put the metal to him, he's talking about killing a roach. Like it's things like that. Or he'll like be describing making a very complicated meal, and all you'll see is just his like whites of his eyes as he's chopping something, and there are things flying all over, and it's because it's the grease from the pan because he's frying something. Like the way that this book is depicted, every chapter, you know what the punchline is. You know that it's not ever going to be something gruesome, and yet the way that it's drawn and the way that it's described and the way he talks, it's absurd. And as the story goes on, like you kind of get little bits and pieces of what his past is, because you don't know why he's a house husband. You don't know how he went from super assassin, where other gangsters in the story run away from him, to like this world where he's living now. But like it's great. It's fantastic. It's so funny, and it's so easy to read. Like every time, like there's like 12 or 13 stories per volume, because they're all really, really short. But it's really fun. It's so amazing. I don't know how else to describe it. If you pick up the first volume and aren't laughing your ass off, like there's something wrong with you.
Would you say it's kind of in the same like comedy vein as One Punch Man?
No, this is way more blunt with its comedy. Like it's like One Punch Man is funny because it's absurd.
Yeah.
Way of the House Husband is funny because like every chapter has a joke. There's a punchline in every chapter, and it's short. There's not really an ongoing story, with the exception of like they'll do little 3 or 4 chapter story arcs where like his goal is to go get an action figure from an anime that his wife really likes, and then they'll do cosplay. Like it's so goofy. And you see this guy who's like 6'5", and he's got like these dark glasses, and he's got fucking dragon tattoos all around his back and arms, and then he's wearing a little apron that has like a happy little bear on the front of it. Like it's so funny. And what's great is, I mean, following the creator on Twitter is really fun, because they're constantly like posting clips from the TV show that's coming out, because they're doing like a live action show. It's just great. The whole series is fun, and there's like 4 volumes out, and it's very pleasant and makes you just it's a really nice distraction. If we're talking about distraction comics, this one is some of the best, and it all takes place in Japan, like in real life Japan.
Perfect.
So, check that box off your Pop Sugar card.
Yeah, they have a bunch of them that are related to like the 2020 Olympics and stuff. So it's like it's set in Japan because it's the host of the 2020 Olympics. And I was like, oh, so we thought in January.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess, do we want to do one more really quick? I don't know, Paul, if you have one more you could throw out there, maybe.
Yes, I do. I want to recommend the Judge Dredd magazine because it's really good right now. But again, that might be too close to the surface, considering my favorite strip in it is about the early days of the judge system when they're helping suppress riots against police brutality. So anyway, I will instead recommend The Department of Truth, which is the new Image series by James Tynion IV, art by Martin Simmons. The elevator pitch for this book is that all the conspiracy theories that you hear about, like the Earth being flat or the moon landing being faked, those are all true if enough people believe in them. So
that's a cool premise.
Yeah.
There's a super secret department in Washington, part of the government, whose job it is to make sure no one believes in those. And that's the Department of Truth. And the book follows a new recruit to that department. The second issue just dropped, so you can jump onto it right away. But the biggest appeal to me is that Simmons' artwork reminds me a lot of Bill Sienkiewicz. So it's a crazy looking book. It's a very painterly, a lot of sort of distorted images. It's visually very unique, on top of it having a great premise. So I have the second issue on top of my to read next pile. Can't wait to jump into it. So I want something brand new.
Cool.
That's one.
Yeah, I think you'll really like this book, Kate, if just for the art, and because it's crazy conspiracy stuff, which I feel like is kind of in your wheelhouse. But
super is, yeah.
I think you really like, you're a big fan of Ray Fawkes, if I recall correctly, and I think if you like Ray Fawkes, you're really gonna like the look of this book.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have so many things on my to read list now, thanks to you guys. I really appreciate it.
Good.
And anybody else out there, if you have any suggestions for Kate, kind of based off of this discussion today, make sure to send them in to us. Send us an email, ircbpodcast@gmail.com, and we can add more things to Kate's to read list once she has the free time after she's got her big doctorate and she can perform heart surgery and stuff. That's what you're
Not
doing,
that
right?
kind of doctor.
Oh, wait a second. Shit. Okay. Well, no, this has been really cool. I'm glad that we got some things figured out. So, Kate, I hope you get a chance to read some, if not all of these, and you can report back to me and Paul maybe sometime in the future on a future episode.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Because I'd be really excited to hear what you think about some of those. But anyways, you can follow us all on the internet. We're going to wrap up the show here, I guess. We can follow us all on the internet. You can follow Paul at Oh Hi Paulie. You can follow me at Mike Rappin. And you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, where the whole spiel. I try to post things when I can.
This show, as well as our many subscriber-only episodes, are powered by fans like you on Patreon. You can go over there, check out some of that exclusive audio at patreon.com/IRCBpodcast. And if you haven't already, please take a minute to rate and review the show. I think 5 stars is a pretty fair review myself. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts.
You can also join us on Discord at ircbpodcast.com/Discord, and make sure to tell a friend or two about the show.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all the music for our show. We can't thank them enough. Xander is a very cool guy who edits this show, and sometimes, just seeing his face on the screen just warms you up. It's great. He's a great person. I want to say thanks to Paul and Kate for being on this episode. Thanks to everyone out there who hangs out with us on Discord and listens to the show. You're all wonderful people. Thank you for supporting us after so many years. I just feel like saying that sometimes. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.